Faith Kipyegon just attempted to become the first woman to run a mile in under 4 minutes, and despite giving it her all, she was still a long way off, running a 4:06.91 gun time. While she did stay mostly on pace for the first 2 laps, she began to slip in the 3rd lap and gassed out hard for the 4th and final 400 meters. Despite her being an amazing runner, it was not even close. And looking back at this Breaking4 attempt, I honestly don't think Nike believed she had any real chance of achieving the mark from the beginning. I even have reason to believe that they set Kipyegon up for failure with this event. And on top of that, I think Kipyegon and this whole project was a scapegoat to improve Nike's brand as being pro-women's equality, when anyone familiar with the company knows that is completely untrue. To understand exactly why though, we need to go back to when this project was first announced. Roger Bannister famously became the first man in history to run a sub 4 minute mile in 1954, immortalizing himself in the sport's legacy. Whilst thousands of men, including high schoolers, have since followed in his footsteps, no woman has been able to get close to the mark. This was set to change when Nike announced their Breaking4 project in April of this year, where they recruited their sponsored athlete Faith Kipyegon, multiple-time Olympic and world champion and the holder of the dominant women's mile world record, among many others. Similar to the Ineos 159 challenge where Eliud Kipchoge became the first man to run a marathon in under 2 hours, Breaking4 would use the best of Nike's sports science and engineering department to help her run the seemingly unachievable time. It was set to be a landmark feat for women's running, if Kipyegon could pull it off, and a testament to the grit and determination of Faith and thousands of female athletes around the world. Now, when this was announced, the majority of athletics fans thought her breaking the 4 minute mile was a virtually impossible task. She would have to prove her own world record by 3.25%, or roughly 7 seconds, which is monumental in the running world. For reference, Kipchoge's sub 2 hour marathon took 2 attempts and the best of Nike's sports science department for success, and was only a 1.75% improvement on his personal best. Like everyone, I was also initially skeptical, but I assumed that Nike had some new trick up their sleeve they bet could shave several seconds off her time, just as they had with super shoes and the drafting formation for Kipchoge. I mean, why would they spend all this money and risk their reputation on an attempt they did not think had a good chance of success? Nike gave away very little on how they might shave those 7 seconds off, but a lot of the speculation was surrounding the drafting strategy. Specifically, this paper suggested that if Kipyegon had 2 pacers, one in front to break the wind resistance and one behind her to break the wind turbulence that pulls a runner back, she could potentially run a 3:59 mile. The paper was dubious in that it did not scan Kipyegon's body or exact proportions, instead using estimates and respected equations to calculate the potential wind resistance on her body, but it did get people thinking. Drafting is said to have shaved 5.5 minutes off Kipchoge's marathon time, so it seems like a legitimate strategy. If you complement this with some new supplements like bicarbonate of soda, which has been widely adopted in the middle distances over the last year due to evidence it delays the buildup of lactic acid in the muscles, therefore improving performance, and add some crazy illegal super spikes like we're presumably cooking that could shave a percent or 2 off her time, then maybe, just maybe, sub 4 was actually possible. I mean, the super shoes were a huge part of Kipchoge's sub 2 hour time. Whilst they did debut a few years before the attempt in 2016, the specific shoes he wore were updated to be extra energy efficient by foregoing World Athletics rules on the amount of foam and carbon plates that can be used in the shoe. He also would have had a few years to train in them by that point, which is a few years where he can train at higher speeds with better recovery due to the more effective shoes. Although Nike did make some improvements to the spikes Kipyegon broke a world record in, there was not any new technology like a carbon plate or super foam that was touted to make a big difference. They altered the proportions of the shoe to fit Kipyegon's foot and running style a little more specifically, and shaved the weight off by a few grams or so, but these improvements aren't significant enough to have a huge effect. Okay, so Nike didn't give her much help with the shoes, but they still had a new drafting strategy planned for her, right? Supposedly the flagship improvement that was going to be the game changer for this run. Well, Nike did not go with the proposed drafting formation in the aforementioned study, instead opting for a much more complex one. It had a shield of 5 runners at the front to block the incoming wind, and a spoiler of runners at the back. There was then an additional curved wall of runners designed to guide the wind around Kipyegon as much as possible. What is strange is that this much more complex formation was a last minute change, and it shows when you look at how it was executed on the day. I mean, during the 3rd lap, you had some individual runners 30 meters ahead of Faith just continuing to run. I get that by this point she's slowed down and they were maybe trying to keep a 4-minute pace, but at a certain point you have to realize that she's not going to make it, and you should hold back to keep giving her the drafting benefits. I don't really blame the runners much for this, mind you. I think it was the poor planning that meant these guys had to learn and coordinate a complex formation in a very short space of time. But by the results, we can see that it did not have anything close to the intended effect. Given drafting studies have shown that pacers need to be as close to the runner as humanly possible, you would have hoped that Nike would give athletes sufficient time to practice a difficult pacing setup. Otherwise, you risk disrupting Faith's rhythm or negating most of the benefits that the wind blocking provides her. And it seems that when given such a short space of time to learn this formation, the athletes understandably went with the safer option, keeping a safe distance from Faith, but in doing so, sacrificing the potential speed gains from on that. The initial plan was shown in the Amazon Prime episode, where they had a 5-person wedge formation tightly around Faith, essentially a combination of the Ineos 159 formation and the one proposed in the drafting study. However, they scrapped that last minute as they felt it was too risky with so many runners being a meter away from Faith. Add the size difference between them and the kickback runners have, and tripping mid-attempt was a real possibility, but the decision to scrap one of the main ways they thought they could boost performance so close to the attempt is just one of the many reasons I think this is a poorly organised event, and why I think they never really gave Kipyegon a shot of it. I mean, surely before you announce such a high profile race, you at least make sure that the primary strategy for achieving your goal is actually doable. I also think Faith found the drafting formation they used very uncomfortable, as well as the whole Breaking4 attempt in general. She looked uncharacteristically nervous on the line, and I can't imagine being surrounded by a battalion of elite pacers would have helped things. Any elite athlete will tell you that mental preparation is just as important as physical preparation, especially for a massive target like this. It makes me think that even she did not think she was capable of running a sub 4-minute mile, despite probably going into this race in excellent shape. I have seen some people suggesting that Kipyegon was not in the same form that she was for her world record attempts in 2023, and that could contribute to her not achieving the time. And whilst I don't necessarily doubt that, we should remember that she almost broke her 1000 meter personal best all the way back in April, which is not exactly a time where she would be periodized for optimal performance. At 31, you certainly wouldn't expect her to be in the same shape she was for her world records, but I actually do think she is in better form for this than most people have suggested. The problem is that the goal Nike had forced upon her to market this attempt was so unassailable that it didn't matter, because whilst I completely understand that Nike is doing this solely as a marketing gimmick to sell shoes and improve their brand image, you'd hope they'd at least set her a goal that she had a realistic chance of achieving, or that they do everything in their power to get her somewhere near it. Because for Kipyegon, it can't be enjoyable to chase an unreachable target in front of a global audience, knowing that no amount of effort will get you close. Because she put in loads of effort, let me make that clear, it was a heroic performance, but she just had no chance to begin with. At the very least, you'd hope this would elevate Faith's legacy and women's distance running in general, whilst also serving as a compelling test of human performance. But it just feels like all the effort Nike put into the Breaking2 and Ineos 159 projects was not present for this Breaking4 project. Kipchoge's success in the marathon and in Ineos 159 seems to have really helped improve the profile of running. He is one of the few people that's been able to somewhat transcend the sport, and I believe the Ineos 159 challenge was a big part of that. They gave Kipchoge a very tough but theoretically achievable goal and invested loads into helping him get there. This was Nike's chance to propel Faith beyond the distance running scene, but it really feels like they threw her under the bus by setting an impossible goal and not even trying to give her the resources to get close to the mark. It took Kipchoge 2 attempts to break sub 2 hours in the marathon, and whilst of course he failed the first time, there was certainly an air after the first attempt that the sub 2 hour barrier was an achievable goal with some tweaks to the system. Kipchoge got to hold his head high knowing that his first attempt had shown that sub 2 hours was possible. I don't think anyone who knows anything about the sport has walked away after watching Breaking4 thinking that a female athlete running a 3:59 mile is possible in the near future. And I kind of felt bad for Faith, who had to talk afterwards about how nothing is impossible, when we all know the reality of this situation. Another aspect I hate about this is the fake female empowerment role Nike was trying to take with this whole project. This was framed as a story of how women can push boundaries, in sports and in life, just as much as men can. And I can get behind that message as long as it's done in the right way. But of course, Nike had to frame this explicitly as women can be just as good as men, with the commentators constantly talking about how inspirational this was for women around the world, and commenting on the alleged stupidity of this not being an officially recognised attempt by World Athletics due to the presence of male pacers. Like 11 of them.
As we know, based on current rules and regulations, this won't be a ratified world record because of the use of male pacers, and that's the only reason. Since Faith is the fastest woman in the mile, she has to use male pacers. So we'll get into that a little bit because Diljit, truly, this needs to evolve.
I agree with you. As we evolve and women evolve in sport, the rules need to also evolve.
Acting like this doesn't apply for male athletes as well. The whole point of a world record is that no one's been able to run it yet. Now, as a man, I obviously can't speak for women's thoughts on this, but it does feel very patronising to me when this message is forced down our throats so much. Why not let the attempt speak for itself as a testament to Faith and women's running, rather than Nike posturing so hard as being pro-women's rights? Well, we know why. It's because Nike does not actually care about female empowerment, but is desperate to appear like they do. To be honest, I think this challenge did the opposite of further women's running, and merely emphasised the massive disparity between men and women's sporting capabilities. Watching the figure of Kipyegon framed against the much larger figure of Stewie McSwain and Grant Fisher, who were practically jogging next to her, whilst the greatest female middle distance athlete of all time fought heroically for every last second, was a pretty stark image. I get that we all know that men and women have different physical limits, but this isn't exactly an image that is helpful to advancing women's sports. This leads on to another thing that was scrapped with the pacing formation, which was to make it an all-women's team that would rotate after 800 meters, similar to the Ineos 159 challenge. That was scrapped as it wasn't seen as feasible once again, and instead they gave this tokenistic inclusion of Gemma Reekie and Georgia Hunter-Bell to jog near Kipyegon and drop out after 800 meters. I mean, surely Nike could have put more effort into a rotating women's formation for better optics, but I just don't think they cared that much. The problem is that from Nike's perspective, there is a good argument to say that this was still a success. It's hard to tell how many people outside of the running world watched this attempt, but at the time of recording, ESPN and Nike's own YouTube replay of the Breaking4 attempt have almost a combined 1 million views, which is pretty big for the running world. The comments from what I can tell are all generally positive. I've also seen a couple testimonials online of people's family members who don't watch running knowing of this attempt. I can also speak from personal experience on this matter, so it does seem to have made its mark beyond the running community. Taken together, this presumably means that Nike improved their brand awareness and image of being connected to the advancement of women's sports. So despite this being nothing more than a half-assed marketing gimmick by Nike, I would not be surprised if they're quite happy with the returns they are seeing. Ultimately, Nike can do what they want. The Ineos 159 was fundamentally intended as a successful marketing venture for their shoes, but at least in doing so they put genuine effort behind one of their prized athletes and helped to raise the profile of running in general. With Breaking4, it feels like they threw the GOAT of women's distance running into an impossible challenge, also they can cash in on the shoe sales whilst framing the project as female empowerment. It's a waste of resources and does not feel fair to Kipyegon. I just hope she actually got something out of this for herself. Join me next time where we will be discussing the Nike 11:59 challenge, where Jakob Ingebrigtsen will attempt to become the first athlete to run a 5k in under 12 minutes. Nothing's impossible, guys. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section below. What were your impressions of Breaking4? Here is a video of mine that YouTube recommends you watch, and I suggest you follow their advice. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Happy training.